speaking with renowned composer and vocalist Sussan Deyhim, whose vocal contributions can most recently be heard in Alexandre Desplat's Oscar-nominated score to Argo. Thanks so much for speaking with me today.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
So I guess to start, how did you get involved in music, and how did you find the path to film music?
Whoa, that's a long story. Well, I was a ballet dancer in my early days, and so obviously, you were and folk musician and dancer. When I was in Iran, I was studying with some of the oldest musicians and dancers from different regions of Iran, with all the influences from neighboring areas, India, Pakistan, Turkey. So sort of from childhood, I had this relationship with music, and later on, I gravitated towards theater and multimedia and electronic music and then film music. So music has always been a part of my whatever medium of art I was part of. And because of my theatrical and my dance and all my previous experiences, there's always a visual component to my work. I compose a lot of music for my own work. So my music has always been very much evocative, whether it's been with the visuals or not. There's always a very, very visual atmosphere when you hear my music. A lot of painters or writers actually work with my music while they're writing, just because it's not very linear, it's not very traditional in any way, so it allows this atmosphere for other things to happen. And that's one of the reasons I've always been attracted to work with film, because it's you're kind of that extra arm or leg that a scene needs to be completed. And my relationship with film started a long time ago, and I've done a lot of art installations and art films, and worked with Peter Gabriel. I think that was my one of my first collaborations, Last Temptation of Christ. And then it just went on with I worked a little bit on The Kite Runner with Alberto Iglesias, with John Debney on his Stoning of Soraya M, and Richard Horowitz on Any Given Sunday, and recently on a sci-fi, actually a sort of like a horror film with Anton Sanko for Lionsgate. So it's just been going on while I'm still pretty much involved in my own work, which is has a lot to do with multimedia and progressive multimedia work.
Well, that must be very interesting to keep. You're constantly changing things up, and to be such a versatile musician, you're never, I think, glued to one area. So you must at least keep your mind very stimulated.
Yes, it's important, especially because my background, I spent 20 some years in New York, and I was part of the sort of avant-garde New York scene. So we always try to keep things open and mix traditions and create new traditions. And also, right now in the industry, there's a lot of limitation with music has become a lot more categorized. So to do film music or art installations, it's wonderful because there's a much broader, more abstract-minded atmosphere around the film score than it is in to do a record in the record industry.
Right.
So for someone like me who has developed extended vocal techniques and on the level that I have, it's always like a blessing when you work on a sci-fi film or a Middle Eastern film or an abstract scene, and you could really extend the vocal ideas and just go beyond the tradition of songwriting and like specific traditions of jazz, classical music, world music, and all that stuff, which is all fantastic. But it also locks you into hearing music in one way,
Yeah.
And I think the sonic palette is so wide and so interesting that it's just wonderful to keep it open.
So, as a vocalist, when you are hired to come work on a score, what do you try and add to a film score? What elements does the human voice have that can't be duplicated by a physical instrument?
Well, I think it's human voice is one of the most primordial instruments. So it's not just a melodic component or rhythmic component. It also, like sonically, it has a sort of psychic effect on people, especially if you're using it. Again, it's a very powerful instrument because it talks to other humans in a way that an amazing cello solo could also do. But there's something very intimate about and naked about human voice.
Right.
So once used in ways that are creative and innovative, I think it really, it's a very powerful instrument to use in all kinds of different ways, And my favorite work is when I work with composers and they have a scene and there is some kind of an idea, and then I come in and I work as almost like sometimes as a vocalist actress, and I just add to the component of the film, even if I'm singing in a melodic way, but choose the right register, the right tone, the right amount of sensuality or aggression or whatever, so that it really carving a vocal texture combined with the music that is already written or it's in the process of being written. And then a lot of composers score around my vocals, which in a way is one of the best ways of getting what I can give to a movie the best, because I can do a lot of things that people haven't heard.
Right.
So clearly they can't say do that thing because they don't know that thing exists. So when I do it, then go, oh my God, this is like really cool or whatever, maybe not cool. But most of the time it just works that because I have this vocabulary of vocal ideas that I've developed over the last 30 years. So when people don't know what to ask me, so the composers who worked with me before, they always just bring a very simple thing, and they just say, why don't you just here's the scene and come up with some ideas, and then we take it from there. But having said that, with Alexandre Desplat, we actually had both things happening. There was some very written portion, and there was some open portion of the project was for me to sort of improvise in a percussive way or more interacting tonally with the film. So I like both of it, but I think that just because I have this sort of vocabulary of vocal ideas that you don't really necessarily can refer to as something, it's not referential.
Right.
Sometimes I say to my friends, like, just let me just do this, and then and then they say, oh, I understand what you're saying.
And I mean, since your voice is your most personal instrument, and when you're performing on a score, what aspect of the film do you connect with most that makes your performance an emotional one? Do you connect with the characters, the story, the plot? What really influences your performance more than anything?
It really varies. I've done a lot of different kinds of things in the arts, from the visual thing to the very dramatic things. I've performed as a Medea when I was an actress. So it's really a matter of what the scene needs. Sometimes there's this incredible landscape with some kind of a, sort of idea behind what's happening in this road and this landscape. It's just you need some very cosmic vocal ideas that are very just not related to some emotional or sentimental thing. Sometimes a scene really needs a dramatic component. You really need to emphasize an emotion that's there that is maybe not coming out as much, and the director wants it to be more present, or there's a sensual scene, or there's a very sad scene. So it really depends on the scene and what the film and the composer and the director need in that scene that they think that actually human voice can bring out. And then you approach it from that angle to begin with. And in that sense, I always feel like I'm more of a, in these kinds of films, that I'm more of a vocal actress, because you really have to understand the emotional component of the scene and the emotional impact that you're trying to get. And even if you're singing the same exact melody, you sing it with a very different emotional kind of intention.
Hmm. And with Argo, you and Alexandra, you really go beyond, I think, the typical conventions of how vocals are used. There's so many unique textures and elements that you add. What and I mean they've used like the emotions that come kind of vary. Some are used very it creates tension. Some are a little bit more subdued. What do you find is the hardest emotion to convey through vocals?
Well, I actually think when there is a specific emotional component, it makes it a lot easier for me to work with, because I know, for example, if I'm singing in a very, very low, I have a very big range. So if my lower notes are related to a very emotional thing, it really has a very different, suddenly the voice as an instrument becomes a very different kind of sound than when you are actually just doing a musical component, like the same register, the same melody. I could be, creating something very cool or something very dark, depending on, what the part is, in juxtaposition to. But basically, I think with Argo, I'm originally Iranian, so there was a very personal thing for me to be involved in this film, and they respectfully sent me the script before I got involved, because I'm an activist and I wanted to make sure. But then again, I've said many times that I knew that George Clooney and Ben Affleck would not get involved in strange politics, so I knew it was just based on it probably is a good project, and it ended up being based on this amazing true story. So having said that, the sessions were for me a little bit involved with seeing scenes from an era in Iranian history that actually made me be in exile for 30 some years. So clearly, it had a very unusual situation. I was in a very unusual situation. But having said that, the collaboration with the beautiful musicians and Alexander, who knew my work from a few years ago, we had spoken to collaborate at some point, and he knows my previous work. So it was wonderful because it wasn't a recommendation. He actually knew me and my work, and he called me and said, "This is finally a project we can work together." And so he was very aware of my tonal possibilities, but also he knows that I'm doing all these other things. So he left some space for me to be more part of the percussive side of the score, sometimes the emotional side of the scores, and sometimes just a tonal sort of synthesis with the nai and the kamanche. So it was a very sort of wide range type collaboration. It's harder to hear the score on the film because it's pretty low in the mix, but it works. It really, whatever Ben decided to do works clearly. It keeps the tension of the dialogue and all that. But I hope that people get a chance also to hear the album, which is really quite interesting. A lot of different influences, and the work we did is a lot of it, is much better heard on the album.
Oh, it does. It's the end result is amazing. Just the way your contributions kind of weave into the music, and it did. I mean, it works in kind of a editing, tension and suspense in the film, but also giving that human touch and giving the whole film history. I feel like that's what you really added. So it was it really affected me. So it was really great.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm glad that you've heard the album as well as seen the film.
So you've performed on so many wonderful scores and have worked with so many great composers. And Kite Runner is actually one of my absolute favorites. Do you find that different composers have different approaches when using vocals, and do you have to find yourself having to adapt to their styles?
Yes, I think different composers have a very different approach to using vocals, and but that's a great thing because it allows well, there's so many wonderful vocalists out there, and it allows us all to be able to, to be featured in all kinds of different ways. And in my case, I think um, quite a few of the composers that have worked with me, they know my music. They've heard my music for years, and they kind of, there's always a dialogue like, let's at some point find the right project to work together. And I think there's, once you hear my music and all the textural stuff and all the melodic stuff and all the influences from Middle East to jazz to classical to completely abstract vocal landscape, it's a very specific kind of thing. And once people hear it, I think they really need to find the right project. But having said that, there's been also a lot of flexibility on my side to be part of a lot of different kinds of projects. I mean, I one day collaborate with Ornette Coleman, or it's been a pleasure. Or one day, I'm singing on a score with Peter Gabriel. One day, I'm doing a mystical Persian project at or a fusion thing at the Broad stage. And so I've kept my music very broad because I just love so many different kinds of music, and I think that the privilege of being a vocalist is that you could switch from a microtonal thing to a very referential melody to a very interesting harmonic arrangement of Bulgarian chant. So you don't have to tune the instrument; you just have to have the sensibility of the music.
Mm-hmm.
So whereas if I'm playing the piano and suddenly I want to go to India, it's not as flexible to tune the piano there and then. But
Right.
And I think that the work with different composers has allowed me to use very, very different kind of ideas on vocal ideas with them. And yes, I think some composers have a much more traditional way of approaching vocals, and which is obviously as good as anything else, as long as it's beautiful. As I said, the voice is a very, very versatile instrument. When you hear vocal music from like India or China, and then Wagner, and then the Pygmies, and then you can imagine this instrument is astounding what voice can do. So
Mm-hmm.
if you develop all these different techniques, which I have done for years, just because I'm very interested in what the human voice can do
Yeah.
as an instrument, not only in a traditional way or like related to music tonally or melodically, but really just the capacity of human vocal, small vocal cords. So I am glad that there are different composers approaching vocal music in a very different way, because it allows for all these different possibilities to be explored. And there are some wonderful singers in all these different traditions, and it allows everybody to be able to either delve deeper into what they already are doing and are great at, or just expand. And sometimes schools lock you into one tradition, and that's sometimes dangerous. I think human voice is capable of doing a lot more than the schools allow us to do, because they just really lock you into understanding that this is a technique, and if you just not do this, then your voice is gonna. And I know for a fact that it's not true. I've been a very, very, very bad person in that way. Just gone way out of the what you're allowed to do or not to do.
Uh-huh. Well, I guess to wrap up, I always love to ask composers this question. If you had the chance to compose any film, the score to any film ever made, with no disrespect to the original composer, which film would you choose?
Oh my God. Well, it's kind of a tricky situation, because I have an idea for something, but I almost can't talk about it. So it's unfair for me to answer this question. Can I answer another question?
Okay. All right, we'll skip the question. I guess. All right. So I guess closing up. Another closing up question. I mean, you're not just a vocalist. You're such a accomplished composer as well, and you've composed so many films. So when you're in the composer role, do you get inspired for ideas in the same ways that you would if you were performing vocally on a score, or do you have to kind of change different mindsets in the different roles that you're so versatile in?
I think that it's a plus when you work with other composers and you have this. You are a composer yourself. You can understand their concerns, whether it's in a film or as a pure composition, or and you could. It's interesting to work with other composers as a composer vocalist, even if you're not the composer, but the sensibility of understanding, what style of music it's in and what the other composer's passion is, and they're trying to achieve. So you obviously could be a much more helpful vocalist collaborating with another composer as a composer vocalist than if you just come in and you want the composer to tell you everything about which register, which tone, which this and which that, which tradition.
Mm-hmm.
It's a very different kind of thing. They're both fine. It's just that mostly I think it's probably more interesting. If I was working with another vocalist, I would prefer them having an idea, compositional idea, as well as just being a vocalist. It makes it easier for me to take advantage of their talent, to feature their talent. So I assume that the fact that I'm a composer and vocalist, it's just a plus because the communication is more interesting and more elaborate.
Well, this has been such an enlightening chat. Thank you so much for your time, and
Thank you so much.
well, and hopefully we get to do this again sometime.
Thank you very much. Very nice of you.